On this Saturday night, France's iconic Notre Dame rises. The reopening of the famed cathedral. The politicians, the pomp, and the prayers. Syria under siege.
I don't think many people saw this coming.
The unexpected insurrection and the push to take the capital. South Korea's president survives impeachment for now. The fading hopes following his declaration of martial law. And the lucrative eels and the controversial quotas.
This is so far beyond unfair and unjust.
The new fishing rules from the feds that some say could destroy the industry.
Global National. Reporting tonight, Carolyn Jarvis.
With 3 resounding knocks of a staff made from wood salvaged from the collapsed roof of the cathedral, the famed Notre Dame in Paris came alive today. The church, one of the most significant places of worship in the world, welcomed crowds and the faithful to celebrate its return. Hello, and thanks for joining us. The 12th century cathedral was nearly destroyed by fire in 2019. Incredibly, it has been rebuilt in only 5 years. Despite howling winds and rain, leaders and dignitaries from around the world gathered to mark this historic event. Our Redmond Shannon is in Paris with the rebirth of a symbol of culture and faith.
Notre Dame, a sacred place for French Catholics and for France itself, traditionally used as the point from which all distances in the country are measured. The historic rebirth of France's Point Zero, protected by a ring of steel. Canadians Gavin and Patricia feel lucky to witness it despite the cumbersome security cordons.
It's important for me and for the humanity. It's something more than me.
Patricia says even those who aren't religious are happy to be here.
We brought some food, some drinks.
Parisians Charles and Louis are practicing Catholics and have come prepared to wait hours in the cold.
A really emotional day because we cry when we saw the fire. So we will cry when open again the cathedral.
The evening event moved inside the cathedral because of the strong winds and opening heavens. President Emmanuel Macron rekindling his relationship with U.S. President-elect Donald Trump, also welcoming the powerful and the rich from around the world. Inside, though, the guests of honour were not the heads of state. A rapturous welcome for the firefighters and craftspersons who Macron says made this day possible. The new roof and steeple built from 1,000 oak trees using traditional tools, and the cathedral walls repolished to a magnificence not seen for centuries. In 2019, many ridiculed Macron for setting a 5-year goal.
We have rediscovered what great nations can do. Achieve the impossible. This cathedral was thus the happy metaphor of what a nation is and what the world should be.
The organ then reawakened, its 8,000 pipes cleaned and reassembled, producing what Macron called music of hope, familiar to Parisians, to France and to the world. Attention for the faithful now turns to Sunday morning when Notre Dame hosts the first Mass of this newest era of its more than 800 years of history. Carolyn?
Redmond Shannon in Paris for us tonight. Thank you. A diplomatic milestone was also achieved in Paris today as French President Emmanuel Macron hosted the first in-person meeting between Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and U.S. President-elect Donald Trump since Trump won in November. The gathering happened ahead of the reopening ceremony at the Élysée Palace. Although brief, only about 20 minutes long, Zelensky called the meeting good and productive. Ukraine's president is also keeping a close eye on the situation in Syria, where Russian forces are engaged. Tonight, the government of President Bashar al-Assad is on the brink of being overthrown by rebel fighters. Led by a former al-Qaeda splinter group, the insurgents stormed Syria's second-largest city last week. And tonight, we're learning they have taken control of 2 provincial capitals and are amassing in the suburbs of Damascus. Vincent McAviney has more.
A falling statue of former President Hafez al-Assad met with cries of joy on the streets of Damascus. His son, President Bashar al-Assad, hasn't been seen today, but after 13 years of civil war, tonight there are reports he's fled the capital. A military spokesperson has denied this, claiming they're still in control.
The terrorists' media platforms have not stopped publishing misleading videos and fake news about what is happening across Syria's geography.
But rebel groups across the country have seized more and more territory, and they're not finished. From the north and the south of Damascus, they're moving in, with the U.S. officials claiming neighborhoods are falling one by one. At a meeting of regional powers, Russia's foreign minister was adamant his country would continue supporting the Assad regime. On the ground, though, there's little evidence of that. This graveyard of Syrian military aircraft in the now captured city of Hama, demonstrating how caught off guard the regime was.
And this is probably the most threatened they have ever been, notwithstanding perhaps 2011 when the revolution first started. At that time, the military clamped down very hard on the revolution, leading to the civil war. But now we are in a position where the regime and, more importantly, its backers are significantly weakened.
Russia failing in Syria is some much-needed good news for Ukraine's President Zelensky in Paris today, meeting with President-elect Trump, who made his foreign policy direction clear, posting, "Syria is a mess, but not our friend, and the United States should have nothing to do with it. This is not our fight. Let it play out. Do not get involved." Millions of Syrians were already facing dire humanitarian conditions, now compounded by an uncertain future.
All kinds of intelligence agencies seem to have been completely taken by surprise by the rebel advance. That is how firmly Assad seemed to be in power. Now we don't know what comes next.
Tonight, there are reports that thousands of Syrian soldiers are crossing into Iraq seeking shelter, that Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard has left Damascus, and that Russian naval assets are leaving their port in the country. After 53 years in power, with old allies fleeing, we may well be witnessing the final hours of the Assad family's rule. Carolyn?
Vincent McAviney in London, thank you. Here's what you need to know about the insurgent fighters in Syria. Their group, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, known by its acronym HTS, began as an offshoot of al-Qaeda and has long been involved in fighting the Assad regime. HTS's leader, Abu Muhammad al-Jolani, has tried to remake their image by cutting ties with al-Qaeda, removing hardline officials, and promising to embrace religious tolerance. However, Assad's regime considers HTS a terrorist organization, a view shared by the United States, the UN, and Canada. At least 4 people are dead after an explosion caused a building to collapse in the Dutch city of The Hague today. Parts of the 3-story apartment block were flattened as crews continue to search for the missing. Residents reported hearing a huge bang and screams shortly before dawn. The cause of the explosion is not yet known. Dutch police say a car was seen driving away at very high speed shortly after the blast. To the political chaos in South Korea now, and a failed push to impeach its president. In a televised national address, President Yoon apologized for causing panic and protests after he declared martial law earlier this week, even though he quickly removed it. As Mackenzie Gray reports, despite calls to step down, the president isn't budging.
For hundreds of thousands of South Koreans, it's too late for Yoon Suk Yeol to say sorry.
매우 송구스럽게 생각하며
But that didn't stop the South Korean president from trying, apologizing yesterday for declaring, then quickly rescinding martial law.
저는 이번 계엄
But he didn't use his televised address to resign, instead saying he's leaving it up to his party to decide his political future.
연락이 왔습니다.
Yoon's People Power Party is non-committal, with nearly all their members of the National Assembly declining to cast a ballot in an impeachment vote, leaving the opposition just short of the 200 votes needed to oust the sitting president. Despite that, the party's main leader says they will pursue an orderly departure of the president to minimize confusion. But the opposition isn't confused. They want Yoon gone now, along with the majority of South Koreans, many who are protesting in Seoul. The lawmakers who are supposed to be representing the people are not getting it, this protester said. It is a pathetic situation. Yoon declared martial law on Tuesday, blaming anti-state forces in North Korea, but it quickly became clear the move was about his own domestic issues, like low polling numbers, corruption allegations, and an opposition-led legislature that's reduced him to lame duck status.
Strong law together.
South Korea is a key ally for the West, including Canada, with the Prime Minister visiting Yoon last year and speaking in the National Assembly.
But I'm here to tell you that it's no longer enough to be friends. We need to be the best of friends.
Yoon's supporters wrapping themselves in both the South Korean and American flags. With this student saying Yoon is essentially the last person who can represent the voice of us conservatives. But how long he stays as that voice is still to be determined, with opposition parties able to put forward a new impeachment motion as soon as Wednesday. Mackenzie Gray, Global News, Ottawa.
There is growing pressure on the Canadian government to intervene in the Canada Post strike. The dispute is dragging into its fourth week. The union representing 55,000 workers says it will review the latest proposal from Canada Post before responding, but there are signs the two sides are still far apart. Today, Canada Post said the union remains persistent in their demands. The statement follows public comments by a union negotiator suggesting they are disappointed in the latest offer. The federal government maintains it will be staying out of the dispute. The union representing customs and immigration officers in this country says the organization that's supposed to keep drugs from entering the country does not have the resources to do its job. Speaking to our Ottawa bureau chief and host of the West Block, Mercedes Stevenson, Mark Weber said container traffic at Canada's ports and railways is especially prone to exploitation by criminals looking to smuggle drugs into Canada.
I was surprised to learn, and perhaps this makes me very naive, but that the CBSA doesn't have the capacity in terms of officers or technology, for example, to search the vast majority of containers that are coming into the Port of Vancouver. And we know that's a huge fentanyl entry port. Can you talk to us a little bit about what the ability of the CBSA is to seize and investigate, in particular, drugs in Canada when they're coming in?
Yeah, I mean, we do have good intelligence. We work very hard at it. Again, it's simply a matter of more. We need more people. We need more equipment. We search less than 1% of what comes into Canada. Modes like rail.
Less than 1%?
Rail, we don't do at all. We don't look at whatsoever. We don't know what comes in via train. Again, we don't have the infrastructure. Wow. We don't have the people to actually do that work.
And you can watch the full interview with Mark Weber tomorrow morning on the West Block, right here on Global. The controversy surrounding new quotas for a lucrative fishing industry on the East Coast. Coming up, how the feds are changing the rules for the harvesting of baby eels and the impact it may have. Maritimers who make their living fishing baby eels, known as elvers, are outraged with a new federal plan they say will jeopardize the entire fishery. Letters obtained by Global News on Friday indicate Ottawa plans to slash quotas for license holders up to 90%. Harvesters warn it could ruin the industry worth millions of dollars every year. Heidi Petrachik reports.
Harvesters who fish elvers from rivers like this one are fuming over Ottawa's plan to drastically slash their quotas.
The government prefers a smash and grab. They'll just take it.
His quota likely falling from 1,200 kilograms to just 228, an 80% cut, while others could lose up to 90%. So far, without any federal compensation.
We're completely distraught. The government has done a great job of destroying a fishery in short order.
Elvers are sold mostly to Asia for almost $3,000 per kilogram. Their high value has led to rampant poaching and violence, forcing the DFO to shut the fishery down the past 3 years. And there's been tension with First Nations fishers exercising treaty rights.
The DFO says this would all essentially share the wealth in what can be a very lucrative fishery. Its plan would give 50% of the total quota to Indigenous groups, then divide the rest up into smaller pieces of the profit pie.
Some of that being offered to the very employees of affected commercial harvesters.
And what's particularly perverse about this situation is that Wine Harbor Fisheries is a family-run enterprise. So DFO has sent letters of offer for quota to the license holder's wife, daughter, son-in-law, and son.
The slap in the face is what we got.
Meanwhile, adult eel harvesters like Darren Porter would have to surrender their eel licenses for permission to fish just 5 kilos of elvers.
This is so far beyond unfair and unjust. There needs to be a formal or independent review done of DFO's wrongdoing in the management of the assets.
The federal fisheries minister, Diane Leboutillier, insists it's the only way to get new harvesters into the fishery. We wouldn't accept a situation where other lucrative fish species had only 9 commercial licenses, she writes in a statement to Global News, and the elver fishery should be no different.
We're afraid that in 5 years we may not have a fishery at all.
A $40 million a year industry at stake. Heidi Petracek, Global News, Bedford, Nova Scotia.
Ahead, on the front lines of climate change, how Fijians are responding to rising sea levels. We take you to the island nation next. Climate change and intensifying extreme weather impact all of us, but Pacific Island nations like Fiji face some of the gravest threats. Those living by the coastline are especially vulnerable to rising sea levels and storm surges. Our Megan King traveled to Fiji with funding from the Gordon Sinclair Foundation and reports on the urgent need for climate preparedness.
It's a mangroves not here. All this place was washed away.
Here in Nasalai, a village within Tailevu province on Fiji's largest island, 300 people live in just over 40 houses along the water. It's among the many Pacific Island communities that have been dealing with the impacts of climate change, including rising sea levels.
No other place to go away, no other land. We haven't got any other piece of land, only this place.
Delai's great-grandfather built the current seawall protecting the village coastline from erosion. They're now waiting for the government to build a bigger one. Efforts to plant more mangrove trees are also in the works with the help of NGOs and government funding, but fear remains around what impact future storms may have.
The sea is rising.
Delai's nephew Gabby says he's heard about the impacts of climate change, but didn't take it seriously until it came to his shore.
Where my village is my house is next to the beach, and when I was young, I could walk like 10 meters before I reached the sea level. But now, as I'm getting older, I can just like walk 2 meters or 3 meters. I can reach the sea level.
His home stands on cement blocks to try to prevent flooding, and his village is not alone. Seawater intrusion and land degradation exacerbated by climate change is significantly impacting the quality of life and livelihoods along the coast of Fiji.
A few months ago, this site was the beginning of flooding that impacted the entirety of the Vunanu village. Now, community-led projects are hoping to build resilience for when the next disaster strikes.
The villagers are participating in a resilient community project funded by the locally managed Marine Area Network alongside the Canada Fund for Local Initiatives. Planting fruit trees and mangroves is one step of the initiative, alongside training programs for locals to understand how to lead sustainable solutions. Megan King, Global News, Fiji.
And tomorrow, Megan King will have part 2 of her reporting from Fiji, looking at the role wealthy nations like Canada could play in helping vulnerable countries address climate impacts. Next, could the key to getting rid of microplastics be found in a mealworm? Well, microplastics are tiny particles of plastic that can linger in the environment for decades. But now, researchers at the University of British Columbia say they've discovered a potential way to get rid of them using mealworms. Incredibly, the insects are able to eat and break down the material. And while it offers new hope, the question is, can this have real-world applications? Alyssa Thibault reports.
Yeah, these are pretty happy, healthy guys.
They may look unremarkable, but bugs like these could hold the key to eradicating microplastics by digesting them.
And so that's what insects are able to do with plastic, is like break it down into the individual pieces. And so it's not plastic anymore, it's a carbon compound that they're eating for nutrition.
A team from UBC has been testing this by feeding mealworms microplastics from regular face masks. From 2020 to 2022, during the pandemic, it's estimated 900 billion disposable face masks were produced, many of them now polluting our environment.
Actually, a funny thing about face masks is that they're totally indestructible.
Researchers ground them into a powder which was mixed into granola and fed to the worms. They found about 30% of the microplastics were digested and broken down.
They grew normally. They put on weight normally.
According to the federal government, every year Canadians throw away more than 3 million tonnes of plastic waste from homes and businesses. Only 9% is recycled, while the rest ends up in landfills, waste-to-energy facilities or the environment. The next step in the research is to figure out how the insects are able to digest plastic and if any other bugs can do it too. The team will also be looking at insects which can break down textiles to find out if creatures like the common moth can play a role in tackling fast fashion.
They have some secret about how they're breaking down the clothing. And so instead of looking at them as pests, we're going to look at them as like collaborators.
If researchers can figure out the how, they might be able to scale up a solution. Alyssa Tebow, Global News.
And that is Global National for this Saturday night. I'm Carolyn Jarvis. Tonight's Your Canada is the Calgary Zoo and its holiday lights. We love seeing Your Canada. Please keep emailing your photos to globalnational@globalnews.ca. Thanks for watching. Hope you'll join us again tomorrow. Have a great night.